Are the Anunnaki the gods of the Bible? Recently, there has been numerous discussions and theories that the Anunnaki are the true gods of mankind, and were the creators of mankind. Believers of this theory have pointed to several biblical and extra-biblical sources to try to prove their theory. With the discussion being had, let us deep dive into what the texts say about the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki. The Anunnaki are a mysterious group of extraordinary beings that have been the subject of both conspiracy and history. The Anunnaki have been given credit for being extraterrestrial aliens, the creators of mankind, the true gods of the world, and everything else in between. To understand the truth, we must first determine who the Anunnaki are. The Anunnaki is a term to describe a certain subsect of gods in Sumerian and later Mesopotamian mythology. Specifically, Anunnaki can be translated as royal or princely seed. These royal beings are the offspring of An, or Anu, the supreme god of the Mesopotamian pantheon, and Kai, the goddess of the earth. Together, Anunnaki roughly means the offspring of the supreme god Anu and the earth goddess Kai. Because we know what the Anunnaki are, the children of Anu and Kai, we know exactly who the Anunnaki are, which is Enlil, A or Enki, Nishrag, Sin or Nana, Shamash or Utu, and Ishtar or Inanna. Otherwise, the main gods of the early Mesopotamian pantheon. Mesopotamia being the region that is now modern-day Iraq, parts of Iran, Turkey, Syria, and Kuwait. Mesopotamia and the older Sumeria represent some of the very first cities and written documents ever discovered. Now that we know what Anunnaki means and who exactly the Anunnaki are, we can look further into the different theories surrounding the Anunnaki that have been popularized today through modern culture. Ancient Astronaut Theory. Popularized authors such as Eric Van Daniken and Zachariah Sitchin have accredited the Anunnaki as extraterrestrial aliens who used genetic engineering to make mankind. Although there is no real way of proving that aliens created mankind, we can look at what the Anunnaki say about the creation of man. In the Flood Tablet, which accounts the Babylonian story of the flood and the creation of mankind, explains how Enki formed mankind. The goddess Ninshraga molded humans, and Enlil spilled his blood to create the black-headed or black-haired people. This is also repeated in the Eridu Genesis, the Mesopotamian and Sumerian creation story.
When An, Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag fashioned the dark-headed people, they had made the small animals that came up from out of the earth come from the earth in abundance, and had let there be, as befits it, gazelles, wild donkeys, and four-footed beasts in the desert.
The black-headed or black-haired people refer to a very specific group of people, that being the Sumerian and Mesopotamian peoples. The Sumerians referred to themselves as the black-headed people, and they called their land the land of the black-headed people. This indication is telling. When the gods that made up the Anunnaki created mankind, they created the Sumerian and by extension the greater Mesopotamian peoples, based on their own words. If we take these into account as truth, then the Anunnaki did not create mankind. They claim to have only created a certain group of people in a defined location, that being Sumeria and the rest of Mesopotamia. When looking at the words of the Anunnaki, they do not suggest creating mankind, which places a wrinkle in the ancient astronaut theory, with the Anunnaki creating mankind. As the Anunnaki themselves state, they lay claim only to the very specific group of people in a specific geographical location, and not the rest of mankind. Anunnaki, the true Judeo-Christian God? The idea that the Anunnaki are the true Judeo-Christian gods have been popularized in a number of media and pop culture channels and TV shows. Although there are a wide range of varying beliefs, there is an overarching point of connection. Theorists of the Anunnaki being the God of the Bible often point to 3 specific instances in the Old Testament as proof to their hypothesis. The first major point being the creation of mankind, the second being the Great Flood story, and the last being the father and patriarch of Judeo-Christianity, Abraham. Although theories do vary, many people believe that it was the Anunnaki that created mankind, and because the story of the Anunnaki is older than the story of Abraham, the biblical patriarch, who was born in Mesopotamia at Ur-Kasdim, then that would make the Anunnaki and Mesopotamian stories more credible. They often point to how the stories of the Anunnaki had been written down thousands of years before the Old Testament had been written down, and point to this as a deciding factor. A serious flaw to this theory is that the Anunnaki, in their own words, never claimed to have created mankind, but instead claimed to have created only a specific group of people in a specific place, that being the black-headed people in the land of the black-headed people. This claim, as compared to the language of Genesis, is very different. Genesis in the Bible makes the claim that the God of Abraham created all people. These 2 statements already create a divide as to the intentions and scale of the prospective stories. In the case of the Anunnaki, their intention is hyper-specific and hyper-focused on a specific location, that being the Mesopotamian people in the land of Mesopotamia, while the God of Abraham is much grander in the level of his focus. This theme of being grander is a significant difference between the Bible and the Mesopotamian texts. An example of this being that the Anunnaki do not claim to have created all mankind. They do not claim to have created the earth, and do not claim to have created a proper afterlife. Each of these instances are claimed by the God of Abraham in the Bible. With the idea that the written stories of the Mesopotamian and Anunnaki are older than the written Bible is true. However, this statement on its own is misleading. It is true that the Old Testament did not begin being written down until the time of Babylonian captivity, but the Bible did exist in oral form. Traditionally, the Bible was orally told and had been orally told until a need to write down its saying was created when the Jewish people had been taken captive. This means that it is difficult to place the origin of where the Bible had began to be orally told. One thing that we can determine is that the oral traditions of the Bible predate the Babylonian creation story, the Enuma Elish, which was first written down the same time the Old Testament had first began to be written down. In short, it is difficult to say the Anunnaki created mankind when they themselves make no such claim. The second major topic often discussed is that the Anunnaki theorists believe that the Bible stole the story of the flood from the Mesopotamians. Believers of this hypothesis often point to Abraham being from Mesopotamia, possibly even Sumeria, and the fact that a flood and Noah-like ark is written about in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest written stories ever discovered. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the story of the god king Gilgamesh, who was 2 parts god, 1 part human. A major theme in the Epic of Gilgamesh is Gilgamesh's journey to try and achieve eternal life. On his journey, he meets a man named Utnapishtim, who was a survivor of a great flood. Gilgamesh is not the only flood story in Mesopotamia. In fact, there are at least 3 different flood stories describing a great flood: the Eridu Genesis, the Ashur-Hassas epic, and of course the Epic of Gilgamesh. Despite all 3 flood stories originating from Mesopotamia, each tell a similar but slightly different story. Even among the Epic of Gilgamesh, there are even older flood stories that predate the Epic of Gilgamesh, such as Zarathustra. Zarathustra of Shushabrak is listed as the last king before the Great Flood in the Sumerian kings list. This would mean that even the Epic of Gilgamesh relies on an older story that was likely orally passed down. How does this compare with the Bible? Like we mentioned earlier, the Bible had not been written down when the events of the flood had happened, but neither had any written Mesopotamian source been found during that time either. This leaves a fairly large ambiguity as the origin of the flood story. and it is difficult to say that the Mesopotamians hold an absolute authority in regards to the flood. The reason being that almost every single ancient people have a flood story, and the majority of the flood stories around the world include a divine being telling a chosen person to build some sort of boat to survive. To say that the Anunnaki are the true gods because the Bible stole the story of the flood from Mesopotamia does not stand, as even the Epic of Gilgamesh comes from an older story. The final popular argument that the Anunnaki are the true gods of the Bible comes from the idea of Abraham. The idea comes from the fact that Abraham was likely born in a place called Ur of the Chaldees, otherwise known as Ur-Kasdim. There are two major theories as where Ur-Kasdim is located, with the majority opinion being that it is in reference to the ancient Sumerian city of Ur, and the minority being just south of modern-day Turkey, but well within the Mesopotamian sphere of influence. Regardless of where Ur-Kasdim is located, it is uncontroverted that it is located within Mesopotamia, and thus be under the control and influence of the Mesopotamian gods, such as the sons and daughter of Anu and Kai, the Anunnaki. Traditionally, Abraham decided to worship the God who created all things, and many theorists of the Anunnaki believe since Enki created mankind, he must be the God that Abraham worshipped, Enki being the son of Anu and Kai, making him an Anunnaki. And such, the Anunnaki are the one true gods of the Bible. This theory is heavily flawed. As mentioned previously, the Anunnaki make no claim to have created mankind, but instead claim to only have created the black-headed people or the black-haired people in the land of the black-headed people. This alone would not fit the criteria of Abraham's worship, which is the God who created all things. The next major flaw, and the most obvious and fatal one, is that Abraham was for all intents and purposes a Mesopotamian. He was born in Mesopotamian city. He lived in a Mesopotamian city. He would have seen and likely worshipped the Mesopotamian gods. And it was the very same gods that he expressly rejected when deciding to worship the God who created all things. This is reinforced with extra biblical sources about Abraham's father, Terah, the idol maker. Abraham's father was an idol worshiper and made idols for worship. Terah, living in a Mesopotamian city, would have made idols to sell to people who lived in that city. That would mean that Terah sold idols of Mesopotamian gods to sell to Mesopotamians. Since the Anunnaki were the supreme gods of the Mesopotamian pantheon, it is only logical that Terah would make idols of the most important gods within that pantheon of the people who lived there. And we know that it was these very same gods that Abraham expressly rejected, making it impossible for any of the Mesopotamian gods, including the supreme beings of the Mesopotamian pantheon, the Anunnaki, to be the God of the Bible. The Anunnaki topics discussed in this video are not an exhaustive list of the Anunnaki theory. However, the topics discussed are some of the bigger points of error often discussed about the Anunnaki and the God of the Bible. The Anunnaki theory is wide and has too many points to discuss for a single video. That is why I ask, what are some of the theories you have heard about the Anunnaki hypothesis? Let me know in the comment section below, and for more Supernatural History TV, like and subscribe.